There is a diagram that has been copied by hand for 700 years. 10 circles, 22 lines joining them, arranged in 3 columns top to bottom, and read as a map of how everything that exists came to exist. It is called the Tree of Life, in Hebrew, Etz Chaim, and almost everyone who has seen it in the wrong order. They saw it on a tarot deck, or a heavy metal album, or a wall in a shop that sells crystals. What they did not see is that this is a piece of precision engineering from the 13th century, that every line on it is placed for a reason, and that the reason is one of the most ambitious ideas anyone has ever written down. Kabbalah means received, not discovered, not invented, received, as in handed down, and for most of its history, handed down quietly to a small number of people, usually married, usually over 40, usually after years of other study. That restriction is not mystique for its own sake. It is a judgment about what the material does to somebody who is not ready for it. Here is the question the whole system is built to answer. If there is something infinite, and it is genuinely infinite, then there is no room for anything else. Infinity leaves no space. So how is there a universe, and how are you in it? Kabbalah's answer is stranger and more beautiful than the question deserves. The infinite made room. It withdrew. That is what the 10 circles are. Not gods, not places. 10 stages of the infinite becoming finite enough to hold a world. And the diagram reads downward, from the first flash of the thing to the ground under your feet. We are going to build it. One circle at a time, in the order they were emanated, with what each one is, what it does when it is out of balance, and what it looks like in a person you have actually met. Then we will draw the path that runs through all 10, which has a name, and that name is the reason the whole diagram sits in the shape it does. By the end, you will be able to look at any version of this tree, on any album cover, or any temple wall, and read it. It begins with nothing, not empty space, nothing in the strong sense. The Kabbalists gave it a name anyway because they had to call it something. They called it Ein Sof, without end. Sephirah 1. Keter, the crown. Ein Sof is without end, so before anything could exist, the infinite had to make a space where it was not. Isaac Luria, teaching in the hill town of Safed in the 1500s, gave that act a name, tzimtzum, contraction. The infinite pulled back from a single point and left a cavity, and into that cavity it sent one thread of light. Keter is that first thread, the crown sitting above the head rather than on it, which is the point. It is the part of you that is not quite you. Kabbalists call it the will before the wanting, the moment before you know what you want, when there is only the bare fact that you are going to want something. You have been in it. It is the half second before an idea, when you can feel that something is coming, but there is nothing yet to describe. Then it arrives, and you say, I have an idea. And by then, Keter is already over. It cannot be examined, because examining is a later stage. That is why it sits at the top of the middle pillar, alone, and why the oldest texts barely discuss it. There is nothing to say about a thing that happens before description. Sephirah 2. Chokhmah, wisdom. Now the flash. Chokhmah is the first actual content, and it arrives whole, all at once, unstructured, not reasoning. The idea before you have had a chance to think about it. It sits at the top of the right-hand pillar. Everything on that side of the tree gives, expands, pushes outward. Chokhmah is pure outward, a burst of raw material with no shape yet. Every person who has had a genuinely good idea knows this feeling and knows how useless it is on its own. It arrives complete and it arrives unusable. You cannot act on it. You cannot explain it to anybody. If it stays in Chokhmah, it dies there, and most ideas do. Sephirah 3. Binah, understanding. Which is why the very next circle sits directly opposite it, at the top of the left-hand pillar, and does the other job. Binah takes the flash and gives it walls. The Hebrew root means to distinguish, to separate one thing from another. Binah is the mind asking, what exactly is this? What is it not? What would it require? What would it cost? It is the first act of limitation in the universe. And limitation is not the enemy here. Limitation is what makes a thing rather than a blur. The Zohar calls Chokhmah the father and Binah the mother, and the sense is structural rather than sentimental. One supplies, the other forms. Nothing further down the tree exists until both have done their work. And now look at what the diagram is telling you. 2, 3, and every pair after them sit across from each other on opposite pillars. The tree is not a ladder. It is a series of tensions, and each one has to be held rather than solved. Between them, on the middle pillar, there is a gap. Later Kabbalists marked it and gave it a name, dot, knowledge, and were careful to say it is not an 11th circle. It is what happens when wisdom and understanding actually meet. It is drawn hollow because you cannot aim at it. You can only build the two either side and let it appear. Sephirah 4, Chesed, loving kindness. Below wisdom, on the giving pillar, the tree turns from thinking to character. Chesed is the impulse to pour out without conditions, generosity, mercy, the open hand. And the Kabbalists say something about it that almost nobody expects. Chesed, on its own, is a catastrophe. Unlimited giving does not produce a good world. It produces a world with no edges, a parent who never says no, a state that never enforces anything, a person who says yes to everyone and therefore keeps no promise to anyone. Water with no riverbank is not generous. It is a flood. Sephirah 5, Gevurah, severity. So directly across from it sits the opposite, and this is the circle people flinch at. Gevurah is judgment, restraint, discipline, the drawn line. Its other name is din, which simply means law. The instinct is to read the left pillar as the bad side. That reading is wrong, and the tree is built to stop you making it. Gevurah is what makes Chesed mean something. It is the no that gives the yes weight. It is the surgeon's precision, the editor's cut, the boundary that makes a relationship survivable. Luria taught that when the light first poured down, the vessels meant to hold it shattered, and the sparks scattered into the world. He called it Shevirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels. And the vessel that broke hardest was Gevurah, because judgment without balance turns into cruelty faster than any other quality on the tree. The repair, he said, is the work of ordinary people doing ordinary right things. He called that tikkun, mending. It is the reason this system produced an ethics and not just a diagram. Sephirah 6, Tiferet, beauty. And here is the center of the whole tree. Tiferet sits on the middle pillar, below the gap, and it is connected to more of the other circles than anything else on the diagram. Look at any version and count the lines. They converge here. Tiferet is what you get when mercy and severity are held at the same time. That is why the word chosen for it is beauty, and why the older texts also call it truth and harmony and the heart. We recognize it instantly in people. The person who is kind but not a pushover, who can tell you something hard without making you smaller, who is warm and has a spine. There is no separate technique for that. It is those two other circles in proportion and nothing else. Everything above Tiferet is happening in the mind. Everything below it is happening in the world. It is the junction, and it is the only place on the tree that touches both. Sephirah 7, Netzach, endurance. Below the heart, the tree stops describing who you are and starts describing how anything actually gets done. Netzach sits at the bottom of the giving pillar. The word means both victory and eternity, and the link between those two meanings is the whole idea. What wins is what lasts. It is the drive that keeps going after the feeling has gone. Not inspiration. Inspiration was 4 circles ago. This is the part that comes back on day 60. Sephirah 8, Hod, splendor. Opposite it, at the bottom of the limiting pillar, sits Hod, and the pairing is exact. Hod is form, method, structure, the thing done properly. It is also where the Kabbalists put language, ritual, and craft. Netzach, without Hod, is somebody working extremely hard in no particular direction. Hod, without Netzach, is a beautiful system nobody has ever run. Every project you have watched failed on one of those two. Sephirah 9, Yesod, Foundation. The middle pillar again, and one of the strangest circles on the tree. Yesod gathers everything from all 8 above it and channels it into a single point. The texts describe it as a funnel, and they associate it with the unconscious, with dreams, with sexuality, with the imagination. Yesod is where a thing is fully formed but not yet out, the completed intention, the words on the tip of your tongue. It is the last stage where you could still stop. Sephirah 10, Malkuth, the kingdom. And then it lands. Malkuth is the bottom of the tree, and it means the physical world. Your table, your hands, your Tuesday, the rent. Kabbalah does something here that most mystical systems do not. It does not treat the bottom as the cheap end. Malkuth is where the entire descent was going. All 9 circles above it exist so that something could exist down here to receive them. The Zohar calls Malkuth the place with nothing of its own, and means it as praise. It is pure receptivity, a mirror. The whole point was to arrive. Now the shape. Follow the order we just walked, 1 to 10, and watch what your eye does. Down the middle, hard right, hard left across, back right, down and across again, zigzagging, then straight down the center to the ground. It is a lightning bolt. That is not decoration, and it is not an accident of layout. The Kabbalists drew it deliberately and named it the lightning flash, and in some texts, the flaming sword. It is the path the light takes coming down, and it has to cross from side to side because every level has to be balanced before it can descend to the next. And the 22 lines joining the circles are the paths back up. 22 because there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. The Sefer Yetzirah, the oldest text in this tradition, calls the whole structure the 32 paths of wisdom. 10 circles plus 22 lines. It is the same number every time, in every century, in every copy. So where did the diagram come from, and how did it end up on an album cover? The oldest layer is the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, a text so short you can read it in an afternoon, and so dense that people have spent lifetimes on it. It is the first place the 10 sephirot and the 32 paths appear. Then, in Castile in the late 1200s, the Zohar. It is the central book of Kabbalah, written in an archaic Aramaic and presented as the teaching of a 2nd century sage, Shimon bar Yochai. The man who brought it into the world was Moses de Leon, and most scholars now hold that he wrote it. He died in 1305. Then Safed in the 1500s, and Isaac Luria, who lived to only 38 and published almost nothing, and whose students reshaped the entire system around contraction, shattering, and repair. And then it left. In 1516, a Latin translation of a Kabbalistic work called Portae Lucis, the Gates of Light, was printed in Europe, with a woodcut on the front, a bearded man holding a tree of 10 linked circles. That picture is why you know this diagram. It traveled out of its own tradition and into Renaissance magic, then into the occult revival of the 1800s, then into the tarot, then onto the album covers. Something is worth saying plainly about that journey. Much of what gets sold as Kabbalah in English has been separated from the language, the practice, and the community that produced it, and often from the ethics. The tree survived that separation because a good diagram survives most things. But the version that has the depth is the one still attached to the tradition it came out of. Here is the part I would keep if I kept one thing. The tree is not a hierarchy. It is a set of pairs held in tension. and every pair is a quality you already have too much or too little of. Giving against restraint, endurance against method, flash against structure. The middle pillar is not a separate virtue. It is what appears when the two sides are balanced, and it cannot be pursued directly, which means the practical instruction of the whole system is unusually simple. Find the pair you are currently failing. Almost everyone knows which one it is within about 5 seconds. Then do not try to become the middle. Strengthen the side you are short of, and the middle takes care of itself. That is what tikkun means at human scale, not fixing the universe, repairing one relation in you that is out of proportion. I put this whole line of thinking, from the Kabbalists through Goddard and Proctor, into a book called The Law of Attraction, What They Actually Taught. It is 129 pages with a 30-day workbook, and the link is in the description. If this was worth your time, subscribe. I make one of these a week, properly researched, from the sources rather than from other videos. The last one was the Kabbalion and the 7 Hermetic Principles, and it is the natural companion to this one. 700 years of hand copying, and the diagram has not changed. 10 circles, 22 lines. Now you can read it.